So there's this line in Savitri that says, nature does the most in us, and God the high rest. So where is Purusha in that? We know that nature is Prakriti. And God is the supreme, unmanifest, working through the gods and divine forces. And Purusha is something else, a third thing. So if our vital, physical, mental energy systems and behavior patterns and life in general is all nature doing most in us, and God is the unknowable, unmanifest, supreme being beyond all manifestation and in all manifestation nonetheless. What is this Purusha that we're supposed to liberate from the former and unify with the latter?
Well, I just keep coming back in my practice to oneness, this unitary consciousness, and I think that's what Purusha, I don't know, I can't say it's an expression. And the oneness might be, I mean that the oneness is a property or a quality or perhaps of Purusha when it's experienced directly.
Yeah, so this is the question. I'm not asking us to try to theorize about it. But if we have some notion, some sense, some experience of it, what is that? That's what you're getting at. So say some more about that.
It's thatness is when you experience that timeless being. And that's often suffused with bliss.
For you. So there is a line in the synthesis in which where Sri Aurobindo is talking about the self and the psychic being and such things. And he ends that chapter by saying, we shall know that as that silence and peace.
Well, I keep coming back to those first two lines of the adoration of the Divine Mother, a stillness absolute, incommunicable.
Meets
the sheer self-discovery of the soul.
Okay, so these are indications that we need to keep in mind and keep in front of our practice if we practice.
I try and see the stillness in the activity, and it's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you have to separate the two. That's the first thing. You won't be able, as I understand it, and then through my own experience, know. You will not experience that silence and that peace in the activity until it is unshakably established in your own state of being. So that the liberation of Purusha from Prakriti is exactly this. It means this. It means liberating a part of ourselves that is capable of absolute stillness and peace from all the other parts of ourselves, and dwelling in that awareness of stillness and peace in life, in the face of other types of activity and movement. The activity and the movement are always going to be there. But the stillness and the peace in the self is usually not going to be there until one makes that a deliberate, constant effort. And it's easy to practice it anywhere, anytime. But it's also easy to forget to do that. But the observation that I have made recently is that stillness and peace grows in its massiveness until it embraces the other things. It won't be found in the other things. It will be able to embrace the other things. And that image is used by Sri Aurobindo quite frequently when he passes through all the planes and enters into the stillness, which is spread out like a sea, and then it comes back into the range of experience and embraces the world. So this movement of, we read these lines at the beginning of the workshop, but first the soul must rise above the form. And in that freedom, in that free space of vastness, bring it down, bring that down into the abyss. Let that pure, vast vibration of being come down into the abyss of emptiness which you have created by your practice. But this embrace is, I think, an interesting benchmark in the process. Because if that peace and stillness and silence are experienced as a kind of substance, not as a state of the stillness of the body or an idea about not being involved, but if it's really tangibly felt as a substance of stillness that is huge, then an interesting thing can be observed, which is also mentioned frequently in Savitri. It's possible to then see all the movement, all the flow of activity, all the busyness, all the ideas, all the feelings, all the intentions that are constantly manifesting in small and big ways. To see that whole flow as a flow of Prakriti in the embrace of the stillness. And when one experiences all the busyness like that, one isn't so much drawn into that experience because there's a kind of cushion that the stillness is providing between. And we had this experience, we used to talk about this experience when the mother was in her body, of having a sensation of being in a cushion, her force around all the time, created a kind of a sense of a cushioning of the outer incoming stimuli. You actually felt like things didn't quite reach you because of this cushion. And that's a tangible kind of feeling. So it appears to me that the force, the divine force, the mother's presence, the new consciousness, those are all synonymous, is there to help to create that cushion, to help to give us another support than our own effort. Because as soon as we become a little bit still, that presence comes in to the field. And if we can just allow it to permeate and build up that stillness in the subtle atmosphere, then it seems that it saves us, in terms of traditional practice, a lot of effort. It's a grace. But it's a grace which, according to the teaching, has a specific purpose. It's not just meant to give us a sense of peace and luminosity periodically because we call it or want it or decide to sit in it. But it's meant also to be cultivated as a constant presence in oneself. So then it becomes a consciousness in us of that stillness and peace that embraces everything. The Purusha in us becomes conscious of that. Instead of being conscious of the movements of the mind and the vital and other people's activities and sensational stimuli, it's normally conscious of all of that. Even if it's completely still, it's still conscious of all of that. But then it becomes conscious of this presence that is other than all of that. And it seems to me that by becoming conscious of that, the Purusha is liberating itself from the other, and eventually is absorbed in that, so that it and that piece are the same. It moves beyond a consciousness of that and realizes that that is its essential nature. That spiritual substance of peace and stillness and light is it. First it's conscious of it as its object, but eventually I think it becomes conscious of it as itself, and spread everywhere.
It seems like ego has to, or individual egos have to get out of the way or evaporate or somehow surrender or I don't know exactly.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm suggesting is happening in proportion as the true self, the Purusha, identifies with the stillness and the light and the all-embracing thatness of it. Then the ego is dissolving in proportion to that expansion. The minute the self identifies with the vital movement and the mental movement, that's the ego. That is exactly what ego is.
So it's kind of held in check.
It is first of all held in check and then annihilated. If we're willing to have it disappear completely. It's all a question of will.
I was going to say effaced, and it's like that was literally right, held in check and effaced and annihilated. It's kind of a progression.
Yes. But then, this also gives nature and all the movements of time and space that quality of prakriti that is not depending on us at all. It's just not necessary for us to be identified with it because it just keeps going on in its way. So the liberation of the Purusha is really a liberation from Prakriti. So complete that one no longer has any interest in anything. Personal interest. Because nature is taking care of everything and oneself is in the stillness and the peace. And so it's not necessary to identify with anything as being some personal object or drive or the two are both there and one is liberated from the other. Suspension of judgment, suspension of desire, suspension of interest, but everything continues to go on, just as it always did.
The car drives itself.
Except that you're aware of another aspect of yourself. Yeah, the car drives itself. And it knows the goal of everything that it does. And then we come back to the concept of the higher intuition. When the self is still and the vast is there, that vast includes all of nature and all of the planes and all of time and every single iota of energy in time and space is a product of that vast. And one can surrender completely and confidently in the ongoingness of everything as it must be. And be in complete peace about everything.
So that one would still live their lives, but they would live in more of a faithful state of consciousness so that...
Faith, yeah. Your life would not be a blind faith, it would be a constant affirmation of the inevitability of each moment. And so you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to take, umbrage at whether or not it's as it must be, because it is.
I had this experience in the last 24 hours, where yesterday afternoon my landlord came and basically he's very nice, and said he was going to sell the house I'm living in, which means I won't be able to afford to live there anymore, of course. And so there was all this going on because it's like, wow, I was going to India this winter and then, you know.
What can you do?
And then this morning I woke up and it's like, whatever.
You surrendered.
You know, it was just like.
But not whatever.
No, but.
If you really surrender, then it's not just whatever, it's exactly right.
Well, the faith in that was there, meaning I completely trust divine choreography, timing, and intention. So I just trust that whatever happens as a result of this, it will be the right thing.
So if that trust is taking place in you, along with the stillness and the peace that embraces it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then even if it's not working out the way you would have preferred,
Right.
you can be aware that it's not working out the way that you might have preferred, but it doesn't bother you because you don't necessarily know how things should work out.
Well, I was going to say I did even better than that because I was aware of the that actually in the very short time I was no point in having a preference. You know, there was no point in having a preference. So it was like, it wasn't like, well, it didn't work out the way I had preferred. That's what I meant by, oh, whatever. It was like, there is something else that's going to be unfolding here, and that will be the right thing. So it's good.
So then I think there's a third level of the surrender that Sri Aurobindo is really talking about, because he says that his yoga begins when we've already achieved that liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's beyond that, he describes as a conversion in our experience of the static, calm witness and the flowing, inevitable prakriti into a total identity of those two, which becomes a dynamic divine force creating each moment. That's the supreme bliss state. But it's not the bliss of nothingness, it's the bliss of allness.
Aha.
And this is his particular added value given to the spiritual process of transformation. It has a yet other further goal than liberation.
Right.
But what he keeps saying in these sets of 3 cantos is that first the liberation has to be absolutely established in order for that conversion of the experience of Prakriti into the experience of Shakti to happen. It comes in, but it can't come in if there's any obstacle at all.
Have you gotten any sense, in all this time since the Buddha, that people, a lot of people have experienced nirvana, which I more or less equate with this liberation, of the first liberation, discovery of the Purusha. Certainly, I would think that other people have gotten some sense of that second liberation that Sri Aurobindo has.
I wouldn't say that was so certain.
No?
Oh,
Okay.
I was going to say that too, and that I think you are making it very absolute, which ultimately, of course, it is, but I think that surrender can be complete enough, in moments that you definitely can that you have the experience of that thing. Not that you get to hold it.
The experience, but that's not the goal. The experience is nothing. The realization means that it becomes an energy that is totally other than even spiritual experience.
Right. But it
So
allows you to taste
so
it. The
that-
experience allows you to taste
I think there probably have been a few yogis,
The word that comes in.
but I wouldn't say that it was very widespread.
Yeah, okay.
very much that.
It seems like the first liberation is so satisfying, so complete, or
And-
seductive, or whatever.
Yeah, that's it.
Enough.
That's it. And few enough have experienced anything beyond that it hasn't penetrated the thinking and the teaching of that in general. So the Buddhists these days, who are plentiful and good communicators and have achieved a very massive penetration of the thinking and aspiring in humanity, are not inserting that further goal. So I've recently heard, and one can hear, talks by many competent Buddhists in many different lineages. And it's almost a commercial product now.
Yeah.
You can go to a few workshops and get mindful of the emptiness easily. Whether that really liberates your Purusha or not, of course, is another question. That's a matter of yoga, and even that is not strongly emphasized by most of the teachers.
So is it a matter of allowing the consciousness to broaden to that realm or state of consciousness where it's well, I was just saying the word profundity, which means
Yeah.
the meaning of it all, where you can then take your place in it.
So that's what I want to read now. What does it really amount to?
But I wanted to ask you just what you were saying about the whole Buddhist thing, because that's, noticeable. And why do you think that is, that you can get that far in that realization and not know or sense very strongly that there's something beyond that you haven't stepped into yet? Because there are some,
Well,
yeah.
they don't all invoke the divine Shakti. It's only at a very, very high level of certain schools of Tantric Buddhism that actually invokes the descent of the divine Shakti. Most of it is about purification of the nervous system,
Yes.
quieting the mind, expanding the consciousness. That's where we just got to. But beyond that, the idea of the divine Shakti is still a little bit intimidating for most traditional schools.
Yes, the idea, but if you're a practitioner and you've practiced and you've accomplished those other things that come before, you think the whole being would just open to it automatically, like you wouldn't have to have an idea about it.
Yeah,
you just
but
have.
you might think that, but I don't think that.
Yeah.
So I want to read
Yeah, I would do that.
I want to read just the first section of Canto 3. And we will hear a teaching on this question.
Book 1?
What?
Book 1, Canto 3?
Yeah. A world's desire compelled her mortal birth.
That's what I meant.
Not necessarily desire for her birth.
Oh, yeah.
A world's desire compelled her mortal birth. One in the front of the immemorial quest, protagonist of the mysterious play, in which the unknown pursues himself through forms and limits his eternity by the hours, and the blind void struggles to live and see. A thinker and toiler in the ideal's air, brought down to earth's dumb need her radiant power. So when we feel this radiance and this presence and this power that are the gift of this Guru, this is what's being said here. This has been brought down for a purpose. And few are still aware of it. But those who are aware of it are really aware of it. It's not a system of belief or a theoretical construct. It is an actual spiritual energy. So if one can tune into that, it's a gift, and it is a destiny. And as we heard during the week of the workshop, it's fine if there are only a few. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight, a colonist from immortality, a pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads. His birth held up a symbol and a sign. His human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise who leads the unseeing world. Affiliated to cosmic space and time, and paying here God's debt to earth and man, a greater sonship was his divine right. Although consenting to mortal ignorance, his knowledge shared the light ineffable, a strength of the original permanence, entangled in the moment and its flow. He kept the vision of the vasts behind. A power was in him from the unknowable. An archivist of the symbols of the beyond, a treasurer of superhuman dreams, he bore the stamp of mighty memories and shed their grandiose ray on human life. His days were a long growth to the supreme, a skyward being nourishing its roots on sustenance from occult spiritual founts, climbed through white rays to meet an unseen sun. His soul lived as eternity's delegate. His mind was like a fire assailing heaven. His will a hunter in the trails of light. An ocean impulse lifted every breath. Each action left the footprints of a god. Each moment was a beat of puissant wings. The little plot of our mortality, touched by this tenant from the heights, became a playground of the living infinite. This bodily appearance is not all. The form deceives. The person is a mask. Hid deep in man, celestial powers can dwell. His fragile ship conveys through the sea of years an incognito of the imperishable. A spirit that is a flame of God abides, a fiery portion of the wonderful. artist of his own beauty and delight, immortal in our mortal poverty, this sculptor of the forms of the infinite, this screened, unrecognized inhabitant, initiate of his own veiled mysteries, hides in a small dumb seed his cosmic thought. In the mute strength of the occult idea, determining predestined shape and act, passenger from life to life, from scale to scale, changing his imaged self from form to form, he regards the icon growing by his gaze, and in the worm foresees the coming God. At last the traveler in the paths of time arrives on the frontiers of eternity. In the transient symbol of humanity draped, he feels his substance of undying self and loses his kinship to mortality. A beam of the eternal smites his heart. His thought stretches into infinitude. All in him turns to spirit vastnesses. His soul breaks out to join the oversoul. His life is oceaned by that superlife. He has drunk from the breasts of the mother of the worlds. A topless supernature fills his frame. She adopts his spirit's everlasting ground as the security of her changing world and shapes the figure of her unborn mites. Immortally, she conceives herself in him. In the creature, the unveiled creatrix works. Her face is seen through his face, her eyes through his eyes. His being, her being is his through a vast identity. Then is revealed in man the overt divine. A static oneness and dynamic power descend in him. The integral Godhead seals. His soul and body take that splendid stamp. A circle of toil and hope and war and peace, tracked out by life on matter's obscure ground. In his climb to a peak no feet have ever trod, he seeks through a penumbra shot with flame, a veiled reality half known, ever missed, a search for something or someone never found, cult of an ideal never made real here. An endless spiral of ascent and fall, until at last is reached the giant point through which his glory shines, for whom we were made, and we break into the infinity of God. Across our nature's borderline, we escape into supernature's arc of living light. This now was witnessed in that Son of Force. In him that high transition laid its base. Original and supernal immanence, of which all nature's process is the art, the cosmic worker set his secret hand to turn this frail mud engine to heaven use. A presence wrought behind the ambiguous screen. It beat his soil to bear a titan's weight, refining half-hewn blocks of natural strength. It built his soul into a statued God. The craftsman of the magic stuff of self, who labors at his high and difficult plan in the wide workshop of the wonderful world, modeled in inward time his rhythmic parts. Then came the abrupt, transcendent miracle. The masked, immaculate grandeur could outline, at travail in the occult womb of life, his dreamed magnificence of things to be. A crown of the architecture of the worlds, a mystery of married earth and heaven, annexed divinity to the mortal scheme. A seer was born, a shining guest of time. For him, mind's limiting firmament ceased above. In the griffin forefront of the night and day, a gap was rent in the all-concealing vault. The conscious ends of being went rolling back. The landmarks of the little person fell. The island ego joined its continent. Overpast was this world of rigid, limiting forms. Life's barriers opened into the unknown. Abolished were conception's covenants, and striking off subjection's rigorous clause, annulled the soul's treaty with nature's nescience. All the gray inhibitions were torn off, and broken the intellect's hard and lustrous lid. Truth unpartitioned found immense sky room. An empyrean vision saw and knew. The bounded mind became a boundless light. The finite self mated with infinity. His march now soared into an eagle's flight, out of apprenticeship to ignorance. Wisdom upraised him to her master craft, and made him an arch-mason of the soul, a builder of the immortal secret house, an aspirant to supernal timelessness. Freedom and empire called to him from on high. Above mind's twilight and life's star-led night, there gleamed the dawn of a spiritual day.